All right, good morning, everybody. If you're hopping on my screen share, we're going to talk about one topic in this video, and that is going to be nested loops. And specifically, we're going to use for loops. Yesterday, we learned of different kinds of loops, and today we're going to talk about primarily that for loop and what it means to put one for loop inside of another for loop. And basically how those things operate. And so yesterday we learned there's a keyword for that allows us to repeat some code. And so you type in for tab to insert a snippet, and it looks like this. So when you have nested for loops, you come into the body of the loop. The body of the loop is in between these curlies. And you're going to type in another for loop. And so I type in for tab. And right away, if you kind of look at this, we see a couple different errors. The first error is that we don't know what length is. So it's filling in this word of length, which it puts that word in there for a reason. And typically what you're doing is you're looping over a certain number of items. And so you would say the length of the number of items is kind of the idea behind that. And so if there's 100 items, you count from 0 through less than 100. In other words, there's 100 iterations of that outer loop. The iterator variable being I would iterate from 0 to 99, right? It would hit 100. 100 is not less than 100. So by coding your for loop this way, you're saying, okay, this loop is going to loop 100 times from 0 through 99. Right? That's pretty straightforward. There's 100 iterations. 0 through 99 is the count of your iterator variable. Yes?
And if you want to count like the 100 like last time, do you just put the equal sign right next to the 100?
If you want to count the 100, then yeah, you just put the equal sign less than or equal to. As we learned last chapter, we can use all those comparison operators to change the loop. Right? So that would loop how many times? 101 times from 0 through 100, including 100. Okay? Now I'm going to change this from 0 to 60, okay? And you'll get an idea of why I'm changing that. So that outer loop is going to loop 60 times. Now, the next error that we kind of have here when we're just using the snippets is that we have this inner loop, and it's saying, hey, if you look at that error message, it tells you what the problem is. It says a local variable, it says a local variable or a parameter variable named I cannot be declared in this scope because the name is used to define another local or parameter. So it's basically saying you already have a variable named I. You can't have two variables named I, right? So it's just a naming conflict. We already have this one called I. So what you could do in this case is just use another identifier for your variable. In this case, you could just rename this to something else. Now, this outer loop, I'm going to change my iterator variable. Again, it is convention to call that I. But I'm going to change it, and I'll explain why, to a different letter, and I'm going to choose the letter M. Okay, notice I'm changing those 3-letter I's to the letter M, and then that way this other error goes away, and I'm going to change this iterator, the inner loop, this iterator to be S, okay? And can anybody take a wild guess if I've got M, the letter M, what M might represent, what the letter S might represent? They're both, and we got this number 60. Minutes and seconds. There we go. Right? So minutes and seconds. Minutes and seconds is a really good example to show you how these loops work. And so if you think of a clock, 1 minute goes up, then 60 seconds, then another minute, then 60 seconds, then another minute, then 60 seconds, right? That's exactly how these nested loops work. If you think of the outer for loop as your minutes, in other words, you start your minutes at 0, and you loop 60 times, right? For the hour, if we wanted to add hours in here, we could, right? So you start the minute at 0, then your seconds start at 0. Then what happens is your seconds go up to 1, then your seconds go up to 2, then your seconds go up to 3, all the way until seconds hit 60, at which point in time seconds go back down to 0, the minutes go up by 1, so M becomes 1, and the seconds start back over at 0. Okay, so when trying to understand how the flow of this works, you just have to think of a clock. This inner loop will run completely until completion. When it completes, the outer loop will tick up by 1 and then run the inner loop until completion again. And then the outer loop will go up by 1, run the inner loop until completion, so on and so forth. So let me go ahead and demonstrate console.writeLine. And I'll say this many minutes and this many seconds. Okay, and if you run this, you can see exactly what I explained in the console. 0 minutes and 0 seconds, 0 minutes and 1 second, 0 minutes and 2 seconds, 0 minutes and 3 seconds, so on and up the chain. All right, so then the minutes go up to 59 seconds. The outer loop goes up by 1. The inner loop starts back over. And then we have 1 minute and 1 second, 1 minute and 2 seconds, 1 minute and 3 seconds. Okay, so that's where you need to start understanding how nested loops work together. And so, you know, whatever problems you can solve with this kind of logic, one thing that kind of comes to mind, and there's a lab, I believe it's your last lab, that really, if you can do that last lab, it is a challenging problem. That last lab, you know, you're doing multiple loops, probably 3 to 4 different loops, and some of them will be nested, okay? And you make this multiplication table, right? So to kind of help you get started with that lab, with this multiplication table, you know, the idea is you're going to take 1 times 1, and then 1 times 2, and then 1 times 3, and then 1 times 4, and you're just making, and then you take 2 times 1, 2 times 2, 2 times 3, 2 times 4, right? And you're just changing these numbers and making them multiply, right? So we can change this problem a little bit to solve a multiplication problem, and like a multiplication table. And let's say, okay, when you're multiplying numbers, aren't those called, what are the individual numbers that you multiply? Those are called, in your math class, they're called what? It's called a product, but what's the individual thing called? Huh?
That's just a guess. Multiple.
I don't.
The single number.
Yeah, what's the single number called? Product. I don't know.
Product is the
When you multiply numbers, what are the individual numbers called? Google, help me. Factors. The numbers that are multiplied are called factors. Getting a little bit back to our math class, right? So you got, I guess you have multiple factors. You got the first factor, the first number you multiply, and the second factor is the second number you multiply. Okay? So maybe if I'm identifying these factors, I'd call them factor 1 and factor 2. Makes sense? So I'm going to rename my outer loop, right? I'll just call this, and notice how I'm doing this. I'm literally, so M is in my code 4 times. I can see that when I just click the letter M. It kind of highlights how many times we're in there. You can right-click this variable. Instead of manually renaming it, like 4 different times, you right-click, rename. I'm going to right-click this to factor 1. And so if I just hit enter now, notice it changed the letter M to factor 1, and I'll change the letter S to factor 2. So now I've got these 2 loops, right? And let's actually do some, let's actually do a little bit of math here. If I say int product equals factor 1 times factor 2. And then I can write a little console.writeLine. The factor of factor 1. Oops, I got single quotes. Let me get the double quotes in here. The factor of factor 1 times factor 2 equals product. Now, anything times 0 is always 0, so I instead of multiplying anything times 0, I'm going to start my loops. Instead of multiplying, 0, I'm going to start them at 1. And I will just loop, I'll just do 1 through 10. Or actually, if I include 10, right, less than or equal to 10. Okay, so this is going to get 1 times 1, 1 times 2, 1 times 3, 1 times 4, 2 times 1, 2 times 2, 2 times 3, 2 times 4, 3 times 1, 3 times 2, 3 times, and so on and so forth. And there you have kind of the result of that. Now that's not the lab, but certainly that's a good start. Okay. Yes.
When is the projector getting fixed?
When is the projector getting fixed? We should get it today. Yep.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Set up today too?
Set up today too? Meaning what?
Is it going to be set up today?
That's what I'm saying, yeah. Okay. Is it becoming a nuisance to just follow on Discord?
It hasn't been. It's been doing this for the last 2 days, where I can't see or.
Oh, well, that's no good.
Yeah.
We gotta get that fixed.
Yeah.
We gotta get that fixed. Huh.
I can see your screen.
Well, we'll figure it out. We'll get that fixed. Okay. Wanted to keep this one short and just do some nested loops. One more thing that will help with labs, because I said I'd keep it at about 30 minutes. Let's do this, and we're going to work a little bit with strings. So that was nested for loops, topic 1. Topic 2, looping over strings. So let's do this. Console WriteLine, please enter your name. String name equals console.readLine. Okay. Let's put in a for loop. I'm going to show you how to loop over a string. Notice we've got this name variable. Notice we have this length. I'm going to replace this length with name.length. Anybody got a guess? Or it's in the chapter. Anybody know? What does name.length represent?
The length of the string.
The length of the string meaning what?
How many characters are there?
How many characters are there? So what's the length of your name, Christian? How many characters are in? Count them up. 9. So the length of Christian is 9. Stephen, what's the length of Stephen? What's the length of Steven? 6. You get me? Ryan, what's the length of Ryan?
I didn't understand where you was getting that from, like this random number.
How many characters are in your name?
Oh, 4.
4. Ryan, Ryan, right? Does everyone now understand the length of a string? The length of a string means how many characters. And just to demonstrate that, if I just do a console.writeLine and I say name.length, okay, without a loop, no loop here. I'm just going to comment out the loop. Okay, so if I just print this out, name.length, we enter in RYAN, we get the length of 4. Right? So let's think about what this for loop is now doing. We start our iterator at 0. We say while 0 is less than the name.length. So Ryan, you just said your length is how many characters?
4.
Okay. So we say I to 0 while I is less than 4 in the case of Ryan. So how many times will that loop? How many iterations will execute in this for loop if Ryan is the input? The answer is 4, right? It will loop 4 times. The iterator variable will be 0, 1, 2, and 3. You count those 0, 1, 2, and 3. That's 4 loops, right? So if I just do a console.writeLine, now I'm gonna come back to that name sub I. Oops, I need to put my $, and just demonstrate how this will loop. The iterator variable is. The iterator variable's value is I. So again, if I put Ryan in, this will say the value is 0, the value is 1, the value is 2, the value is 3. Okay, so that's the first step in understanding I is going to loop 0 through 3. Right, so that kind of combines understanding a for loop, while you need to understand what is the length of a string. And we need to understand that I is changing every iteration of the loop.
Spaces count in the string.
That's a good point. Now, Ryan, what's your last name?
Jordan.
If I put Ryan space Jordan, what do you think the length of that is? Did I hear 11? So let's count. 4 plus the last is 6. So Jordan has 6 characters. Why do you answer 11? 4 plus 6 is 10. Because of space, right? So that is correct. The length of this, Ryan space Jordan, is 11 because it does count the space. Now the loop will iterate from 0 through 10. AKA 11 iterations, the values 0 through 10. Right? We following so far? Cool. Now, check this out. Your name can be broken down into an array of characters. We haven't talked about arrays yet, but let me show you kind of how this can work. If I say name and then I put these square brackets, we haven't talked about this, but inside those square brackets I'm going to put I. Now this is kind of getting ahead to a chapter, but name sub 0, this is said name sub 0. Name sub 0 represents the first character in that string. In that case, it's a capital letter R for Ryan. Right? So we know the first time through the loop that I is 0. So name sub 0 is the first character, which is R. Name sub 1 is the second character, Y. Name sub 2 is the third character, A. Right? So if I kind of come back in here, I enter Ryan Jordan. Notice I can break that down into individual characters this way. Each time through the loop, I'm looking at an individual character. Okay. Now that I know this little trick that putting a string and looping over the string, and then I have access to each character in the string, what could you do with that? Well, there's a lot of potential things that you could do with that, right? But in the labs, we do something specific with that. Okay? And so I'll kind of leave this here, right, as your template for one of your labs. Okay? I believe what you end up doing is like counting the number of vowels, right? And you could say if name sub I is an A, or an E, or an I, or an O, or a U, or a Y, then you've got a vowel. Right? You got to play Jeopardy. I believe Y is counted as a vowel. Is that still correct? I mean, it's been a while. Huh? A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y.
Well, not on the lab.
Not on the lab. Okay. Whether you count Y or not, I'm not. If you can get the normal vowels, not too worried about Y. Okay?
Sometimes it's one, sometimes no.
Yeah, who knows?
Why is that?
There you go. All right, I'm going to stop the recording here, and we have a lab day. So let's get to work on labs.